a fair degree of US vested interest here in terms of the threatened sanctions and tariffs on buyers of Russian crude oil, secondary tariffs. Does India risk an oil shock if this does come to pass?
I don't think so. So we did a very simple and a quick analysis. And let me just put out certain facts in front before we provide our key conclusions. Today, India imports close to 35% of its crude oil requirement from Russia. This was less than 1% before the Russia-Ukraine war. And US, as I mentioned, it is close to 4.5% of its crude oil requirement. If we assume that the imports from Russia is reduced to zero and everything shifts to the US, then there will be an additional cost which India will have to bear. But it is unlikely to be unmanageable, and it will definitely be not considered as an oil shock. The price differential between the crude oil coming from US and Russia, as per our analysis, is anywhere between $6 to $10. And even if we assume that the price differential is $10, our sense is that the hit on GDP or the trade deficit can be close to 0.1 to 0.15%. And that's pretty manageable in today's environment. Even in terms of inflation, growth, our sense is the impact is unlikely to be more than 3 to 5 basis points. So some extra cost, but definitely not equivalent of any kind of an oil shock.
Yes, and India, to its credit, has diversified its sources of imported crude oil away from Russia, but it still remains a major supplier. So just to be clear, Anu, if India is forced to cut back on discounted Russian oil under the price cap, then this is not going to have a major inflationary shakeout, is it?
Absolutely. It won't be a major inflationary shakeup. And I'll tell you, the issue is that even though oil prices globally, or the way trends have played out in India, is that even though global crude oil prices are trading closer to $70, Indian retail consumers continue to pay prices which are closer to $85. So there is a significant price gap. Secondly, if there is a price increase because everything gets shifted to US from Russia, there will be an increase of 3 to 5% in the overall price of the crude import. But that should be very manageable if the government decides to take a certain amount of hit. But if the government decides to pass it fully to the consumer, that would be equivalent of just 2% of increase in retail fuel prices. And that, in our view, is pretty much manageable, especially in the environment where food prices continue to surprise us on the downside and the other global commodity prices remain very benign. The only risk which we see is that if Russia gets cut out of global supply and if it is not offset by any other supplier, then higher global crude oil prices, that will be equivalent of much higher burden on the Indian economy than what we are talking in the scenario one.
Even then, Anu, India does have fallback options, doesn't it? Do you foresee a scenario in which, even if Russian oil does lead to a supply crunch, the absence of Russian oil because of tariffs, will India have to dip into its strategic oil reserves to offset that?
I don't think so. I think if we look at the bigger picture, there is a trade deal negotiation, and I'm sure there will be a commitment to increase energy imports. Plus, India will source higher crude oil imports from other partners, especially in the Gulf region. And I don't think there is a need at this point in time to dip into strategic reserves.
I understand. Then, do you feel that when you look at the negotiations between the US and India towards a trade deal, does it feel like the US side is now playing hardball with this threat to sanction buyers of Russian crude oil, including India, because of the roadblocks, the perceived roadblocks that have cropped up because of agriculture?
I think it's I would say that the greater or the larger issues are beyond by getting more imports of energy imports from US. I think every single country, even ahead of the April 2nd announcement, was ready to commit large purchases of energy products from US. The key risk which we all have to be watchful of is, can US really supply if every single country agrees to buy large amount from the US. So for us, energy imports, I don't think that's a big challenge. For us, the bigger issues worth watching are, one, what is the import concession which India ends up giving US goods coming into the country? Will it be similar to the model of Indonesia, where a 0% tariff is given to almost 99% of the goods? Then it's an additional loss for the domestic industry, or will there be price slash volume threshold? Secondly, in case if there are any manufacturing facilities or investments to be done by the US in India, will the local manufacturing content clause get diluted similar to some other countries? So I think these are bigger issues which we'll be watching out. The other part is related to this whole services trade. India exports almost 58% of its software services to US. So if something else comes up there, I think that is a bigger challenge, which will have to be ironed out. Energy imports or increased energy imports from the US, I think, is something which most of the countries would be happy to, to provide and pay a higher price.